McLinn is accused of beating to death her 52-year-old roommate, Harold Sasko.
We believe that Mr. Sasko was somehow subdued. We don't know how that occurred yet. We're still investigating that. The evidence at the scene suggests that she was the only one involved.
He says McLinn was very open about killing Sasko. He says she told him she wanted to know what it was like to kill someone, and she planned Sasko's murder 5 days before she killed him.
This is 19-year-old Sarah McLinn. In 2014, she sedated, zip-tied, and killed a 52-year-old man who had been like a father figure to her. The murder was so gruesome that everyone had a hard time believing that she had acted alone. The media and the police portrayed her as a monster and a psychotic killer. And it seemed that way at first. That is, until the whole truth of what really happened was revealed.
A lot of testing going on, a lot of talking, trying to figure out what motivation was there.
So, what is the real story, and how did this seemingly harmless teen end up committing such a horrifying crime? Let's dig into the case of Sarah McLinn, the 19-year-old teen that revenged her 52-year-old rapist. 52-year-old Harold Sasko was a successful businessman who owned 3 pizza restaurants in Lawrence, Kansas. His friends and family described him as a very spiritual, kind, and considerate person who was always ready to help others. His ex-girlfriend even said he liked to help people. He had said that rather than die rich, he'd prefer to die broke, knowing he had helped a lot of people. So he seemed like a pretty straight-up guy, and everyone around him seemed to like him. This is why what happened on January 17th, 2014 took everyone by surprise. Hal's family had asked for a welfare check because they hadn't heard from him for a few days. But when the officers went to Hal's home, they were horrified to find the 52-year-old sprawled on the floor. His hands were bound with zip ties, and his throat had a deep wound. The scene was red with gore, with letters F and R written on the wall in red. The police also saw beer cans, and some of them had traces of a sleeping pill on them. A toxicology report would later confirm that Hal had sleeping pills in his system. The authorities also learned that Hal's car, a 2008 Nissan Altima, was missing, along with his roommate, Sarah Brooke Gonzalez McLinn. She was about 19 years old at the time and had been living with Hal for more than a year. Sarah also worked at one of Hal's restaurants. Hal's family later said that she moved in with him while dealing with some personal issues. Initially, authorities thought that Sarah had been kidnapped, but that was quickly ruled out when they learned that she was the one who drove away in Hal's car. But could Sarah have done this to Hal? Or did she witness the murder and was running away from the perpetrator?
We believe that Mr. Sasko was somehow subdued. We don't know how that occurred yet. We're still investigating that. The evidence at the scene suggests that she was the only one involved.
But what reason could Sarah have to hurt Hal in such a violent way? People who knew them said they had a father-daughter kind of relationship. Hal had taken her in when she was at her lowest and had given her a home and someone to lean on. Why would she want to harm such a generous and kind person? A manhunt was underway to find Sarah, and on January 25th, 2014, she was found sleeping in Hal's car at the Everglades National Park in Florida, where she was illegally camping. Inside the vehicle, police found firearms, knives, and some hash. She was brought in for questioning, and she reportedly confessed to killing Hal. She told detectives that she had decided to kill Hal 5 days earlier, even taking steps to make sure it happened. After this confession, Sarah was immediately arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Now, the news of Sarah's arrest was received with a lot of mixed reactions. While the media and the police portrayed her as a gold digger and a psychopath, those who personally knew her had a completely different reaction.
She's a 19-year-old girl, and you heard what happened in there, and you heard, so I'm just going to leave it to you to figure out.
In court, detectives detailed her confession that she chose Sasko as her victim 5 days before the January murder. She admitted to putting sleeping pills in his beer, then after he'd passed out, used zip ties to restrain him and then cut his throat.
This afternoon, we spoke to Sarah McLinn's pastor. He's a pastor here at St. David's Episcopal Church right behind me, and he issued this statement to us this afternoon. He says the announcement of pending criminal charges relating to Sarah McLinn is disturbing and shocking. I, as rector and the people of St. David's Church, will continue to provide pastoral support and prayer to the family, and I will be available to Sarah once she is returned to Kansas.
But who was Sarah, and how did she find herself in this situation? Was she really the psychotic killer that the police wanted to portray her as, or was there something more to the story? Sarah Brooke Gonzalez McLinn had a pretty sad and traumatic childhood. She was born on July 9, 1994, and grew up in Topeka, Kansas. Sarah grew up a naive and shy child, but was also very kind and considerate. She had an older sister with whom she was close, and a younger brother who was disabled, and she would always look after him. When she was still very young, Sarah went through a really horrifying and scarring experience after a pedo neighbor preyed on her and stole her innocence. Understandably, this left her completely broken and traumatized. She started having nightmares and would often wake up in the middle of the night in a panic. The stress and anxiety kept her from living her life in peace, and she began to use alcohol and run away from home. Her parents were worried about her and took her to a psychologist, hoping that it would help her deal with the trauma. But the situation did not improve, as things were already getting bad at home with her parents divorcing. This really affected Sarah, as she felt abandoned and unloved. Over time, she completely lost touch with her dad, and her relationship with her mother became increasingly conflicted. She felt out of place at home and sought to leave as soon as possible. At the age of 14, Sarah found work at Cece's Pizza in Topeka, owned by Harold Sasko. Now, at first glance, Hal seemed like a pretty decent man, but his employees saw another side of him. A manager at one of his restaurants claimed that Hal had asked him to only hire young, attractive girls. The manager thought that this was creepy, so whenever he hired a girl, he'd warn her to watch out for the boss. Sarah received that warning when she went to work at the pizzeria, but she was still very young and naive, and probably thought the manager was exaggerating. Hal was sweet and kind to her, and managed to gain her trust pretty quickly. He would pick her up from school, drive her to work, buy her things, and ask her to confide in him if she needed anything. Funny enough, he asked her not to tell her mom about any of this. A major red flag. But Sarah innocently agreed. She saw him as a father figure and even started to call him dad. At the age of 16, Sarah sadly went through another horrifying ordeal with a man she considered a friend. She and some friends were on a vacation when this older man pushed her onto a coffee table, breaking it on purpose, and proceeded to attack her and burn her with a cigarette. Seriously, this is heartbreaking, guys. I can't even begin to imagine the pain and trauma that she must have gone through. Obviously, this opened old wounds, and she started to spiral. She was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder and was hospitalized at a mental institution after attempting to end her life. After getting out of the hospital, she continued to take her medication and see a psychologist. And after a while, it seemed like she was starting to get her life back on track. However, the situation at home was getting more stressful for Sarah, and she could no longer stand being there. At this point, Sarah was no longer working at Hal's pizza place, but she was still in touch with him, and he would often pick her up from school, take her to lunch, and ask her about her life. This sleazy 50-year-old man saw the vulnerable situation Sarah was in and decided to take advantage of that by asking Sarah to move in with him. He was living alone and was doing well financially, and he even offered to help her with college tuition. At first, Sarah thought it was a bad idea and turned down the offer, but the situation at home was getting worse, with her and her mom constantly at each other's throats. In 2012, Sarah graduated from high school at the age of 17, and that same year she left home and went to live with Hal. This seemed like a new beginning to her, and she believed that this man would help her put her life in order and pursue her dreams. At first, things seemed to work out, with Hal providing Sarah with everything she needed to enroll in her college. He was like a fairy godfather, giving her food, a roof over her head, gifts, yet demanded nothing in return. Sarah's mom, Michelle Gonzalez, would later say that she was really upset about this living arrangement, but whenever she tried to advise her daughter against it, the two of them would get into terrible fights, with Sarah fiercely defending Hal. However, Hal would not hide his true intentions for long, because when Sarah turned 18, that's when Hal's Christianity went through the window. To avoid a lot of questions from neighbors, Hal and Sarah had passed themselves off as stepfather and stepdaughter, so Sarah never imagined that this man would want anything more from her. But now that she was legally an adult, Hal no longer felt the need to hide what he really wanted from Sarah, and began pressuring her to be intimate with him in exchange for all the favors he had done for her. Yeah, figured. But Sarah was completely taken by surprise and refused to do it. Hal was predictably angry and threatened to throw her out and stop his support if she didn't do as he wanted. Also, something that Sarah didn't know at the time, Hal had been keeping tabs on every cent he spent on her, which amounted to thousands of dollars. He threatened to sue her if she left and told her he would wreck her credit rating so that she could never get an apartment or buy a car. She would be homeless, he warned. Sarah was working at Bed Bath & Beyond at the time, earning a minimum wage. Despite this, she was giving Hal most of her pittance of a salary, but it was still not enough. He demanded she pay him back rent. This was ironic coming from the man who once offered her a better life. He also knew Sarah's history with substance use, so one night he got her drunk and high and took advantage of her. Sarah would later testify that the next morning she felt disgusted and wished it had not happened. She told Hal that it would not happen again, but of course it did, again and again and again. And soon, that became the nature of their relationship. A few times each week, he would get her drunk and do whatever he wanted with her. Whenever she refused, he would act like he didn't hear her and continue, sometimes even holding her down while doing so. Some of Hal's friends later told the police that he would often brag about how it was amazing to be with an 18-year-old, but he still complained that Sarah wasn't attractive enough. Sarah later said she felt like a toy to him. I think more than anything, he made me feel like he owned me. To him, I was a toy, his personal Barbie doll. That's what he tried to make me. But Hal wanted a curvier Barbie. So after pressuring her to get a nose job, which cost around $6,000, he also wanted her to get a boob job. But a surgeon refused to do the surgery because she was so young. Instead, Hal convinced her to get butt implants. This totaled up to $16,000, and he added it to the bill she would have to pay before she could leave him. In her testimony, Sarah said, "He was very nice at first and called me his daughter. After the relationship turned sexual, he was very mean. He would always belittle me. He owned me at that point, and the surgery just solidified it for him. I was so embarrassed and hated myself because it had gotten that far. My sister and I used to make fun of girls who did that, and that it was something we'd never do." During the trial, Sarah's lawyer summarized everything that Sarah went through at the hands of Hal, saying she was young, scared, depressed, and traumatized. Mr. Sasko, 33 years her senior, took her in, but then kept her in a state of sexual and financial slavery for over a year, from which she reasonably could not see a way out. Her lawyer argued that this was a case of battered woman syndrome. This is where a victim of domestic violence feels that the only way to escape their abuser is to kill. And that's what Sarah thought. She wanted to get out of this situation, and the only way she could think of was by killing Hal, so she began to plan. On January 14th, 2014, Sarah decided to carry out her plan. She had been planning it for 5 days and had figured everything out. Police would find that she had Googled neck vulnerable spots. 2 days earlier, she had texted her sister saying, "I'm starting to realize I don't want the dream everyone wants for me. I don't want the American dream. I want real freedom, and I know how to get it, and I have to give up a lot. I feel like a caged animal." On the day of the murder, Hal came home and started working on a speaker system. When he asked her to get him a beer, she brought him 3 beers, but laced the 4th one with ground up sleeping pills that she had previously crushed and hidden on top of the microwave. After taking a couple more beers, Hal passed out cold on the floor. She used zip ties to bind his ankles and wrists, and then went to the kitchen to get a hunting knife. She put the knife in Hal's neck, trying to push it as far as she could, but she would later testify that it was harder than she expected. So she used her left hand to hold his head while she jabbed him. She initially told detectives that as she killed Hal, she just didn't feel anything. However, then she claimed that as she saw Hal die, everything was screaming at me. She then took the knife to the sink and wrote the word freedom in red. The investigators only found the letters F and R. Sarah then took a shower while listening to music. She then called into work saying she would not be in for a few days due to a relative's death. When she began to realize the seriousness of what she'd done, Sarah reportedly packed her things, including a picture of her sister, and planned to see the ocean in Texas. On the way, she stopped to get a tattoo, and the tattoo artist told her Florida's beaches were nicer, so she went there. The prosecutor described the method by which Hal was killed as heinous, atrocious, and cruel in nature, and requested a hard 50 penalty, which is a life sentence with a chance of parole after 50 years. They presented other evidence showing that before Hal was killed, Sarah bought a rabbit in Lawrence and killed it in the same way. Investigators presented written statements from people who claimed to have seen her kill, skin, and eat a rabbit. The detective who first interviewed her testified in court that Sarah had told him that she killed Hal because she wanted to know how it felt to kill someone. In 2015, after only 4 hours of deliberation, the jury found Sarah guilty of first-degree murder, and she was sentenced to 50 to life in prison. A lot of people found this sentence to be really harsh, considering the amount of trauma that Sarah went through at the hands of her tormentor. It was later discovered that a lot of the horrors that Sarah went through at the hands of Hal had been withheld from the jury, probably in an effort to protect Hal's name. That, along with the trauma she suffered as a child, was totally dismissed in order to push the prosecution's narrative of a psychotic, cold-blooded killer who preyed on the kindness of an innocent, religious man. However, after the truth came out, there was a lot of pressure from the public that led to Sarah's sentence being reduced from 50 to 25 years. What do you think about this case? Do you believe Sarah deserved such a harsh sentence? Let me know in the comment section, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more.